Day 6 of the 2024 U.S. Senior and U.S. Junior Championships saw some dramatic turns of events as the players kicked off the second half of the tournament following the rest day. Starting with the U.S. Senior, the sole leader, Grandmaster Vladimir Akopian, had few issues holding a draw against one of his main rivals in GM Julio Becerra. Meanwhile, GM Larry Christiansen, the other player tied for second going into this round, lost his game to Grandmaster Jesse Kraai. Akopian continues to lead with 5 out of 6 with 3 rounds left to play. In the U.S. Junior, top seed and leader Christopher Yu extended his lead with a big win over IM Brewington Hardaway. Yu now leads the section by a full point with 5 out of 6, as Andrew Hong, Jason Wang, and Justin Wang are all a point behind with 4 out of 6. In the U.S. Girls Junior, the clear leader Jasmine Su lost her second game in a row, this one to Yasemin Asani, allowing IM Alice Lee and FM Rose Atwell to overtake Su in the standings with wins of their own. Lee and Atwell now lead the field with 4 points. Jumping into the games, we'll start with the game in the U.S. Senior between Julio Becerra and Vladimir Akopian. This one started off with a Petrov defense, and White chooses a line here that's considered to be pretty safe. Queen e2 followed by d3, going for an eventual endgame here, where there's really not much of an advantage that White can play for. This is quite solid, and this game didn't see too many fireworks as both players get their pieces out, and eventually lots of pieces do get traded here on the e-file. Bishop d7, f4, rook trades on e8. Eventually we see rook to e1 here, and White trades off the second pair of rooks. Bishop c6, the bishops came off as well, and neither player here really able to do much in this position, as the two did make a bunch more moves here with the same color bishops, but the result was never really in doubt as neither side can break through. Akopian tries this one attempt to get the king in, White plays king to b1, and Black is not going anywhere. After this, the players did repeat, and the draw was agreed. So Akopian, he continues to lead this section by a full 1.5 points ahead of his next rival, Julio Becerra. Everyone else is at least 2 points behind, if not more. Next up, we have the key game in the U.S. Junior between Brewington Hardaway and Christopher Yu. Going into this round, Brewington is one of several players a full point behind Christopher, meaning he really needed to try and win this game in order to try and fight for first place. And this one, Yu opted for a surprise in the opening, the Accelerated Dragon, not something that I believe he's played before, or at least consistently in classical chess. And he gets a pretty reasonable game here with this early advance a5, a4, queen to a5. This is a pretty well-known plan for these positions. And it seemed like Black actually did get a very, very comfortable game here. b4 takes, queen to b4, putting pressure on this one. And now White goes for the endgame with knight d5. So queen takes d2, bishop takes d2, and really interesting move here from Christopher, rook a2. So White's pieces are hanging on the second rank. The only drawback of this move, of course, is that it hangs knight takes e7 check. This one could not have been taken a move prior, because Black would play king to f8 in this position, and when White takes the queen back on d2, Black is taking this knight on f8. But after rook a2, White takes on e7, takes on c8, but now rook takes d2, and Black is currently down the exchange, but has 2 pieces under attack. Here White finds knight takes d6, the only move, and this one's quite tricky because if rook takes d6, White plays e5, and actually will be getting the extra exchange here with a big advantage. And in case of rook takes e2, this is possible, but Christopher mentioned he didn't like that White can play rook to e1, and Black doesn't want to trade rooks here, but if Black keeps the rook on the board, White can actually keep chasing this one with rook to d1, and it's very difficult actually for Black to avoid the repetition. So instead, Yu finds the very nice move knight to h5, keeping the attack under both of White's pieces. The point here is that now he's starting to take on d6, so there's no e5, and he is still getting the second minor piece. So White goes bishop to f1 here. Now rook takes d6. It was possible to take on f7 to grab another pawn. And then, for example, I think rook takes e2, knight to g5, and bishop to g8. This was mentioned by Christopher in the post-game interview. And he felt like although white has a bunch of pawns with the rook for the two pieces, his pieces are actually very, very active here with ideas bishop to d4 check, knight f4, and so on. And of course, the rook here is super active on the second rank. This position still definitely unclear, but black is certainly at least okay. After bishop f1, rook takes d6, black definitely gets the advantage here as the two minor pieces simply outplay the rook in this endgame. Despite white having two pawns for the rook against the pieces, black's minor pieces are just way too strong here. So g3, rook to a5, now f5, creating more scope for the pieces. White tries c5 because long term, if black's pieces are able to invade on the queen side, eventually white's position will collapse here. So Brewington tries very hard to generate some counterplay. At this point, I think c6 was the only way to keep the game going, according to the engines. And after takes, rook a2 check, for example, white is in some difficulties here. For instance, king to g1, black can even play knight to g4 here. And very difficult position for white. You can't take the bishop on e6 in view of bishop c5 check. King has to go to the corner, and then rook takes h2 mate, for example. Still, c6 was absolutely the best try for white. Instead, bishop c4 is played. This allows black to take on c5 due to the pin. Possibly white was counting on this move, rook f2, but black has a simple move, king to e7, defending the knight, defending the bishop, and now black has, again, two very active pieces for a rook and only one pawn. Black also has an active king, and this endgame is actually just decisive for black. King takes e6, everything is defended here, b5, b4, and Christopher's technique was very, very nice. Rook to a1, black doesn't want to take this because you would lose the rook on c5. You don't want to trade off the rook, but knight takes e4 is a nice way to snag another pawn. The point is that if king takes, then the rook will get out of the pin with tempo, and after any king move, bishop takes a1, black has an extra piece and is, of course, completely winning. So rook check, king to d5, and now king to d4, and this game was pretty exciting, but long story short, black was winning all the way through, as now the b pawn is simply very strong, and black's piece is once again too powerful for white's rooks to deal with. This pawn is simply marching home. So rook f2, b3, h4, and now rook to b5. Great technique here, not going for b2, where white could take on b2, and this endgame certainly not easy for black to win with only one pawn remaining. Instead, rook to b5, black is looking to just promote the pawn and for a full rook. White gives a check, king to h3, and now b2. White is forced to give up the rook, and now it's two extra pieces for black. At this point, the only difficulty, of course, is that black runs out of pawns here, but rook and two pieces against rook is definitely a very, very straightforward win. And here Christopher is able to coordinate his pieces nicely. After rook to b8, he's now throwing rook h8 mate, and it's game over. The game ended after check, g5, and mate was on the board. And huge win for Christopher Yu, as he now extends his lead to a full point in this section with 5 out of 6, with just 3 rounds left to play. Next up, we have the U.S. Girls Junior, and in this one, the leader, Jasmine Su, she ended up losing her game. Was always on the verge of a draw and a loss, but she ends up blundering in the end game and losing, allowing Alice Lee and Rose Atwell to catch up with wins of their own. These games, of course, were anything but easy. Here, Alice is playing against Omya Vidyarthi, and black was under a little bit of pressure in this one. This came from a ready knight f3, e3 opening. And at this point, black has these hanging pawns in the center that are certainly under some pressure. Here, Alice plays the move d4, which is quite sharp. Knight to a4, takes on e5, queen takes e5, and now knight to d5. And the game gets very, very tactical here. The point is that it's hard for black to hold the center at this point. So knight d5, she starts playing for activity. Takes on d4, bishop d6, queen goes to g5, pretty much only safe move by the queen. And now queen to c7. Now at this point, white should have just taken d takes c5, allowing black to take on h2 with check, because after king to h1, black's position here is very suspicious. White has threats of queen to h6, for example, and queen to g7 mate. Also rook to c1, followed by c6 ideas. And black doesn't actually get anything here against white's king. For example, bishop f4, queen to h4. And once again, in the long run, black's position is very, very difficult because of the weakness of this diagonal. That was missed by white. She plays g3 instead, a very, very natural move. And here comes an absolutely fantastic find by Alice. It's actually the only move for black not to get a worse position. Knight to f4. Really incredible sacrifice. According to the engines, bishop to g4 here should have been played by white, although it's still very, very complicated after f5. Things are incredibly tricky. Note that if white takes this one, then there's knight e2 mate on the board. So you can see the potential here for black's pieces. After knight to f4, of course, it's a double threat. Knight takes e2 and knight h3. So bishop g4, difficult move to play here for white. Omya takes the knight on f4, which I think is a lot more natural. Bishop takes f4, threatening the mate on h2 as well as the queen. So queen h4 only move. And now rook to d5. The key move in this combination. Otherwise, this wouldn't work for black. Black would just be down a piece with no threats. But rook to d5 sets up a very dangerous threat of rook to g5. For example, Alice showed this after the game. If bishop to c1, rook to g5 check, queen takes g5. If black were to take this queen, then white has a ton of material after bishop takes g5. But black, of course, has bishop takes h2 mate in 1. So very key resource here after rook to d5. Vidyarthi finds the only move, rook to d3. Where the point is that after rook to g5 check, white can block this one with rook to g3. Nice resource here. If bishop takes g3, then not takes here, that gets mated again, but hg or fg, both of these are good for white, who is still leading in material. Instead, we see rook to e8, much stronger move from Alice, activating this rook. Bishop to f3, rook g5 check. Now there's no rook to g3, king to h1, and c4. She throws this in, looking to keep this diagonal close for some time longer. Rook to c3, rook to h5. Now, because h2 is hanging, white is forced to take on h5 and give up the queen in exchange for some activity. Keep in mind, black has already sacrificed a piece. Now white gets a rook for the queen. So white has a rook and minor piece for black's queen and some very potential threats on the diagonal. So now d5, bishop to e5 from Alice. She has to cover this one at all costs. B takes c4, and queen to d7. This is actually a mistake. Of course, the position is very, very complicated. Impossible to play this one perfectly. Engines like f6 here, rook to g8, queen d8, just kind of holding things together. Queen to d7 could have run into knight to c5, which was not played in the game. The point here is that black can start with queen to h3, threatening mate. White simply defends rook to g2, and it turns out the knight takes b7 is hanging. White has ideas of moving the rook as well with some tactics on the diagonal. Rook to e3, for instance, is a problem. Black would have to play queen to c8 here. Apparently, the position is close to equal, but of course, very, very messy. All three results very much possible. After queen d7, white plays bishop takes h5. Starts to go wrong as now black finds bishop takes d5. The main point here is that if queen takes a4, taking this knight, white has bishop takes f7 and hitting the rook, and white is looking for ideas like rook to g3 with mates on g8, mates on the diagonal, and huge, huge issues here. White is actually completely winning. But black takes on d5 first before white's bishop gets to f7, takes, and now queen takes a4. And this is a big difference. As bishop takes f7, as we see in the game, actually losing in this line. White had to find the only move, rook to a3. Again, these are very difficult engine moves. And once again, apparently the position is close to equal with the pieces fighting against the queen. But it does seem like black is at least a little bit better already. After bishop takes f7, Alice finds queen e4 check. Queen f4 was also strong, just hitting the bishop and the mate right away. Rook to g2, queen e1 check, rook back to g1, and queen takes f2. And this is all over as the bishop and h2 are both hanging. Omya tried one last trick here with rook to c8. Black has to be super careful here. If you take this one, then bishop takes e5, leads to mate. If you take on b2, then rook takes e8 is mate on the board. But of course, it's black's turn here, and she has a mate threat of her own. Queen takes h2 was the end of the game. So very, very messy win by Alice, but she does get the job done and actually gets into the lead for the first time in this event. However, Alice is not leading on her own. Rose Atwell also managed to win her game here against Iris Mu, and this one was quite sharp. Possibly some bit of luck here for Rose as well. We cut to the game in this position. This came out of a Caro-Kann advanced variation. Here, black's pieces are very active, but white starts pushing them back. G3, F3, bishop goes to C2, and now the game does get very messy here after queen to D6. Black goes rook to d8, sacrificing the e-pawn in order to get king f8. And actually, this position is quite promising for Black. Rook to e8 is coming, followed by bishop to d3. It's really not easy for White to defend this. f4 played, rook e8, check, king to g8, and now knight f3, basically finding the only way to plug this knight into e5. Now bishop to d3, knight e5, and we see the trade of bishops. Apparently the engine's like queen h3 here, followed by queen to g2, where White might be under some very, very serious pressure. So bishop d3, knight e5, takes, queen h5 check, king comes up to e3. Surprisingly, Black doesn't have anything more than a draw here. Queen to g6 is now played, using the pin on the e-file, looking for queen e4 check. Queen to c7, check, and here Black does repeat once, but then plays the move rook f8. Actually, I should say she doesn't repeat, but she could have repeated with queen to e4 and already forced a draw here. But Iris decides to take a risk, playing for the win with rook f8. She covers queen f7, which was a threat, and looks to keep attacking White's king. But this was a very, very risky decision. Already here, White could play move like rook ag1, where after check, king to d2. Black runs out of checks, and White is up a pawn with a very strong knight on e5, active queen on c7, connected rooks, whereas Black has the king on g8. So this was actually already a chance for White. Instead, Rose plays queen to e7, giving Black another chance to make a draw. 100% Black should have taken this opportunity. Instead, Iris once again plays for the win with queen f5, possibly because of the tournament situation, needing to win, catching up to other players. But this is just way too risky. Now White gets the rook into the game. At this point, Black has no more perpetual, and White is just winning on the board. Queen takes b7, c5, White takes here, and there's just no real threats to White's king, so White can get away with taking this material. After queen to c2, rook to d1 here, rook e1, Black is 2 pawns down here, and Rose does manage to convert this one, winning the third pawn, trading queens, and she does eventually convert this in the end. So big win for Rose, as she also gets into a share of first place with 4 at f6. She and Alice now lead this field by a half point, again with 3 rounds left to go. So that takes us into tomorrow's round 7. As we enter the final stretch of the tournament, we'll see if the leaders throughout all 3 sections will be able to maintain their position as we get closer to finding out some of our national champions for this year. Should be a very, very exciting and dramatic final set of rounds, and hopefully I'll see you folks back here for the recap. Until then, take care.